Alright, this should not be your normal use case, but let's simulate it anyway. Sometimes you may need to actually sync a sync table. And when your data flows from the beginning, like from the teacher's doc to all other docs, from the student's doc to all other docs, classes, and so on, normally you should always sync the table from its source. But sometimes it happens that you need to sync a table that's already a sync table. One of such examples is to, let's say we have a teacher's table in the payments doc and we want to report back how much we paid out to teachers. Actually, we want to report this back to the teacher's doc. So let's say we add a column here and say paid out amount, and let's manually set it to, so we paid out 400 to this person and 700 to this person and 500 to this person. And we want to sync that back into the teacher's doc and connect that data back to the teacher's table. So we create a view of in teachers out teacher payouts for teachers doc, and we set the rules to be of some secret back, and we hide pretty much everything from this view. And one thing that we have absolutely to include when we sync a sync table, we have to include two columns, the technical columns that are not added by default, but they are there in the row object. It's the origin ID, which is the version of row ID, but the thing with the origin ID is that it stays the same no matter how far you sync this table. So you have to include this as a column. Why didn't it add that one? Okay, it got added, but it got hidden. The origin ID is the original ID of the original row, so a row in the teachers table. If you go here and you find copy row ID, QDU, this is the one that gets passed along when you sync the table. And when you sync the sync table, you know that sync tables, they override the IDs with some long and cryptic ones, which are basically these IDs just transformed with a cryptographic function. But nonetheless, we need to preserve this original ID so that connections between, so that lookups still work no matter whether you get where you get that table from. So no matter whether it's a original table or it's an augmented table with some columns added, or yet another augmented table, the row ID needs to stay the same. And for us to pass it along, we need to include this column. If you don't include this column, the pack will complain and will not sync. It will tell you that you have to include an origin ID column, and another column that you have to include is the sync path. So right now, the sync path just shows the original compact ID, which is a doc ID slash view ID slash row ID. The sync path of so this row was originated from here. Next time we sync this view to some other doc, the sync path will collect both the sync path of its parent and the newly added row path. Yeah, so let's see how this works when we import this to the teacher's doc. So the wrong sync. Oh yeah, we didn't add this to the doc yet. Payments. Does it expose read columns? Oh yeah, should read. This is an example of helpful errors. Should not say rules, should say read. And it may take again just a few moments for this to get saved to the snapshot. So just keep trying. Just keep trying. Finally, we use our secret, which is secret back, and start the sync. And as you can see, the origin ID stays the same. The sync path has now two values, the original path and the one this row had to pass to get to here, to this sync table. So the path of this row here in the payments doc. And now we can use this origin ID, which is basically, well, a row ID. We can use this origin ID to link the data back. One way to get the origin ID is to use this idiom, split this row plus empty string with a slash last. So this is our origin ID. And in teachers row, we make a filter, or in teachers filter origin ID equals this. Oh no, it's not added here. We need to add it here. Origin ID and in teachers equals this row's origin ID. Limit the result to the first row so that we don't get a list of values but one value. And from this column, we can read the paid out amount and the data goes full circle. Now, one fun thing with origin IDs, it does not have to be the ID of the row. It can be your arbitrary ID. You can do things like this row ID. And of course it will not work for now. But if you then go to the classes doc and you sync the teachers, and you may need this if you want to do all the matching, because if you replace the origin ID with your custom origin ID, most likely these mappings will stop working. So this will stop working because it tries to find a row by ID. But maybe it won't. Let's figure out. So did it update the origin ID? Not yet. Let's try loading this again. Not yet. Not yet, but it will do this eventually. So if you have a column that is named origin ID, it will effectively overwrite the default origin ID. And again, you may need this to reduce the amount of data that gets synced across if your doc is very size sensitive, or you want to have custom matching, or you have your own ID mechanism that you can reuse, which makes more sense than an arbitrary ID that the Coda gives you. Let's try again. That is very strange. Why it didn't go across? Oh yeah, because I didn't expose it in the view, right? So I have to enable this column. In each view I'm exporting because nobody sees the columns that are hidden. They are not included in any of the exports. So we included the columns. Let's try again. Yes, the origin IDs are now 1, 2, and 3. And of course, the mappings don't work that anymore here. So the teacher, yeah, we have to reselect the teachers once we've changed the origin IDs, because yeah, these are not the same records anymore. Teacher UID 1, 2, 3, this gets propagated to teachers, classes. This becomes gray because the origin ID didn't yet propagate to this table. And yeah, now they are relinked again. I don't know what was the reason of this exercise for here, But we see that this works if you override the origin IDs with your own values. Again, this makes sense for you. And yeah, finally, the origin IDs that go back here should again read 1, 2, 3. Oh yes, these are the different rows now, so the data got erased. But what's important is that these rows now match up. So if there were any data, the data would have been here. So yes, this is one way you can do if you need custom IDs for the columns. You can overwrite origin IDs and see how the sync path still lists the original row ID, the original big long CODAS row ID in its sync path. That's why it's a separate thing. We couldn't just drop the origin ID. This piece of information is still available because it's still used in APIs. Yeah, just one lesson left for now. See ya.